Good afternoon. We are so glad that you are joining us today for our family call. We have team members participating today to respond to any comments during the live stream. For those of you who are new to our family calls or perhaps just now connecting with Family Match, we invite you to learn more about us by following our social media, and we encourage you to check out our website, family-match.org. Family Match is a web-based technology that provides a platform where families who wish to foster and or adopt can connect with child placing agencies and vice versa. In addition to expediting the connection between families and agencies, Family Match serves as a data-driven tool for child welfare professionals to assist them with identifying the most compatible families who can meet the needs of children. So whether you are a family or agency in foster care and adoption space, we would love for you to continue to get to know us and join us in producing better outcomes for children everywhere.
Hi, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Libby Subkowiak. I am one of the family coordinators here at Adoption Share. And if you are tuning in and would like a training certificate, you can email us at training@adoption-share.com and we will get that out to you.
Thank you, Libby. My name is Christina Mangillo, and I'm a part of the Family Match team as well. And today I have the pleasure of introducing our guest, Dr. Michael Vitacco. He's the founder of VP Forensic Psychology. He's a board-certified forensic psychologist who earned his doctorate in clinical psychology at the University of North Texas. He has over 120 publications on topics ranging from malingering to violence risk assessment. Currently, Dr. Vitacco is a professor at Augusta University in the Institute of Public and Preventative Health and the Department of Psychiatry and Health Behavior. Today, he's going to speak with us a little bit about depression, and we are so glad to have you with us, Dr. Vitacco.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So we are going to talk a little bit today about adolescent depression and really talk a little bit about being aware of those things and also helping our adolescents with prevention and intervention when it is deemed appropriate. So first of all, let me say from the outset, I've done this now talk several times here, and I love being invited to do this. I am adopted as well, and really to talk and have the opportunity to speak with folks who have done it or considering it. It's really just a privilege to do that. So let me get into the kind of the meat of some of the stuff, and I just want to talk about right from the outset that mental health issues matter. And my concern has been and will remain for the foreseeable future that there's way too much stigma that's attached to mental health symptoms. And I'm going to be just incredibly blunt here, is that it often in even some of the evangelical and Christian arenas, which I'm very much a part of, is this entire idea that, hey, just this isn't a real thing, just get over it. And I'm here to tell you that is actually not the case. That there are real factors here that can have dramatic impacts on all our lives, and that sometimes the best thing we can do is have an awareness and have a willingness to intervene, and sometimes intervene on behalf of our child or our foster child who may not have the insight or the wherewithal to do it themselves. So let's talk about what is major depressive disorder, kind of what it looks like. And these are some of the things that what we might be looking for, is that it's this idea of feelings of worthlessness or guilt almost every day. So what I'm not talking about here is just feeling bad when something goes wrong or having a bad day. Listen, we all do that. But these are sort of these intrusive and prevalent feelings that just remain with us. Impaired concentration, indecisiveness. So, often it's just this inability to make decisions on even things that maybe previously the individual had no difficulties making decisions on. Sleep issues. And I'm talking about either sleeping way too much or sleeping not at all. And I think the problem with this is that, first of all, it's a symptom of depression itself. It's a symptom of a mood disorder. But second of all, it sort of is like a dog chasing its tail, is that when you don't sleep, your depression gets worse. When your depression gets worse, you don't sleep. Or, when you're up all the time, your depression gets worse. And because it gets worse, you're unable to sleep. So it really is this circular fashion, but it's a symptom to be very careful of. Fatigue or loss of energy, just not having the ability to kind of get up and do the things that need to be done. Not having interest in activities and things that we used to find pleasurable. You'll see this because the individual that you're observing is just not as involved in the things that they used to be involved in, and report no desire to kind of re-engage in those type of activities. Just feeling restless or feeling slowed down. Just not having that energy to kind of respond in a manner that is, otherwise maybe appropriate. Recurring thoughts of death or suicide, and then losing or gaining weight. And I guess often that is because you're just eating too much, not eating enough, or you're not engaged in the activities that you used to be in, so you're not as active as you used to be. So let's just kind of think about the things that I just said. And I just want to point out that it's not just depression, but there's many things that can be concerning. The symptoms that I pointed out there are really the prevalent symptoms for individuals who are experiencing a major mood disorder. But as parents, as caretakers, we need to be much more aware of things other than that. And then we also, again, as I indicated in my initial slides, we have to be prepared to respond to these things, and not to let stigma or not to be kind of this other ideas get in our way of us doing what needs to be done, and which also could result in us saving the life of our loved one. So let's think about adolescence, right? So here's one of the problems when we talk about mood disorders in adolescence, and we have to be really just crystal clear on this. Is we got these, and I'm a parent of two children myself. We get these really sweet preteens, and as they hit their teenage years, it's a time of dramatic changes, right? There's clearly changes to the body. They're getting taller, they're getting hair in places where they otherwise didn't have any. And that's kind of the easy part maybe to see and to deal with. But what's also very evident, and you see this through brain scans and hormone studies, is that there are significant changes to the brain. And these changes that are occurring makes adolescence, and let me stop here for a second. I want to be clear. When I talk about adolescence, I'm talking really about 13, maybe to 23, 24. The brain doesn't stop actually developing in many people to the age of 25. So we're talking about this time frame where we are much more susceptible to just a variety of environmental factors and internal factors that make depression more likely, and make suicide more likely, that make all these things much more difficult at this time. And add to this is that our adolescents are surrounded by a bunch of people who are going through the same things that they are, socially, environmentally, physically, emotionally, and there becomes a more pressure to quote unquote fit in. And of course, fitting in can lead to just many issues. It can lead to issues of substance use. It can lead to issues of doing and engaging in dangerous behaviors. There is a reason why the courts have showed more grace and mercy to teenagers than they do adults for the same act. And the reason is that teenagers are much more likely to be impulsive, to do these silly things without taking the time to actually think about what are the social consequences of that. One of those things that can also happen, and has happened, is even suicidal behavior, suicidal ideation, where these adolescents with their colleagues, with their friends, are much more likely to be influenced by them. And if they have a friend who engages in suicidal behavior, or God forbid commits suicide, that in and of itself is a risk factor for their own self-harming behavior. It is something that when an event like this happens as a parent or a caretaker, we all need to be much more alert to potential changes in our child, in our individual that we're caring for, so that we are aware of what's kind of happening to them. And that is actually the time to maybe intervene and say, hey, maybe we need to go talk to someone because maybe you're having some feelings that you don't want to talk to with mom and dad, and we get that. But we're going to go talk to a professional to kind of get you some assistance. Adolescent depression is on the rise. This is an old slide by a few years ago, but I want to be very clear. Nothing's changed here. Adolescent females and gender minority teens are at much greater risk, but on whole, there appears to be much more happening with teenagers. I want to point out, and I hope everyone kind of gets this who's watching this, is that I'm now in my mid-50s. The teenagers now experience a whole nother level of peer pressure and various things that I never had to deal with, because now there's the entire concept of social media and this idea that you can be talking with anyone from around the world in a matter of seconds. There are trends that have started online that have been very unhealthy, and quite frankly, just spending too much time in social media and various things in and of itself can lead to a risk. Just think about this study from 2017, which found that 3.2 million adolescents had experienced at least one major depression episode. That's 13% of all adolescents in this country. So a very significant number are experiencing those exact symptoms that I spoke about earlier. And again, that is when our adolescents are much more at risk for a whole host of untoward outcomes. This is when we as parents and we as caretakers need to be at our absolute best to be aware of these things. And it is also my hope that as you get education about these things, you're much more likely to kind of understand the signs, get the signs, and know that, oh boy, we may need to intervene here. All right, this is just a really great slide I found, and not great in that it presents great information, but great in that it's very, 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 very helpful. But if you look at the numbers, you can see very, very clearly that it is very, very suicide and thoughts about suicide related to some of these issues. This is from 2018, has become a real issue. The numbers of itself, if you look at thoughts seriously about committing suicide, we're looking at 17.2% of our adolescents, a higher number of females. Attempted suicide, again, higher number of females, but still 5.1% of males. I want to point that out, 5% of any population, that is not a small number. And then if you look here at suicide attempt requiring medical attention, that's still relatively high. There are some data that are not here that I'm going to discuss, just albeit very briefly, is that why adolescent females are much more likely to think about suicide, much more likely to attempt suicide. Adolescent males are much more likely to complete suicide. And the reason being is methodology. So why adolescent females, and again, this is being general and what the statistics say, of course it's not true in every case, will tend more toward pills and everything. Adolescent males will tend to use more lethal means, including firearms. So the point there is again, we are very, very mindful of that, and being aware of that. Hey, this is not just this is not small potatoes. These are real serious numbers. And if you think, oh, it can't be me or it won't be me, you're not being very honest with yourself, because it indeed can be you. And it also reflects nothing upon you as a parent, nothing upon any of us as caretakers. These are just real things that we all need to be aware of, because it can happen to any family in any social economic status. And then you combine other various genetic and other factors that are more at risk with kids like myself who are adopted. You need to be very aware of what those things are. Okay, so let's talk about these specific adolescent issues, things that we all, especially if we deal with adolescents daily, and if we live with one, we deal with it daily, is that, there's these change in bodiness, and there's change in bodies, change in mood. And moodiness is in and of itself can be just a part of adolescence, as part of them, with brain changes and various things that I talked about. But I want to point out, and this, I really want to take this point very, very, and so you understand this, is that moodiness is normal, but being clinically depressed and having suicidal thoughts and suicidal behavior is atypical, meaning that, like I say, all right, they're having a bad day, they're upset, they want to be left alone, they're in their room listening to music that I hate. That may be normal, and that may be just part of the typical growth of our people. The fact, though, that moodiness and clinical depression as part of that is atypical, and that is something that then requires some intervention, and quicker the better. So it is very imperative that we, as these caretakers, with the people that we love, with our children, really take the time to say, all right, where is this behavior coming from? Where is this going? Where is this from? Excuse me. So if it's just moodiness, okay, they're having a bad day. But if it's this kind of this longer term pattern, when all of a sudden they're talking about suicide, when you see some of the other body changes, when you notice various sleep patterns that are quite different, that's when we need to be, again, at our most alert. That brings me to the other point that I want to make on this slide, is that really what that also requires is all of us to be a lot more aware of what's happening in our kids' lives. I think it's really easy these days to not be aware of the websites they're on, what they're looking at, who their friends are, what they're a part of. And I say this from having a senior son right now who's on his way to college next year. Like, he'll tell me about this friend. I'm like, well, where'd you meet this friend? Well, I don't exactly know where I met this friend. I met them through so-and-so, and we talk online. I'm not saying that's a problem, but what I'm saying is that you as a parent need to ask questions like, okay, who are they? Where do they live? What's kind of going on with them, to be alert and aware of the different influences that can happen on our children, because now the circle that is able to influence them is not just a circle of their friends that come to the house. It's a circle of any friend in the entire world, because of social media and these new technologies. So be aware of these things. If someone is like experiencing suicidal behavior, it's really imperative that we don't say, well, that's just part of their moodiness. That's not a big deal. We're just gonna, it'll be better tomorrow. That is really the time to make sure that there is going to be a tomorrow. Get in there, do what we need to do, have the tough conversations, and if necessary, get professional mental health help. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of these other areas. But we talk about social media, and one of the things we know about social media is social comparisons. And of course, everybody is very, very truthful on social media. Well, of course, that's not the case. So they're much more likely to have social comparisons and these various things that they'll feel that they're not worthy, that their life isn't worth living, because they see so and so doing this and so doing this, without realizing the entire facade of what social media is. Then there's also these times and these new TV shows and various things, and I have an example here of 13 Reasons Why. I'll be very blunt. I did not let my child watch this TV show. I believe it was a Netflix special. But I'll also say we're kind of lax at movies and stuff. Obviously nothing that we think is over the bounds, but we're otherwise okay with many things. But this was one of those things where you looked at the research and looked at the data on this TV show, and it wasn't going to be. We just said no. But you got to be aware of kind of what's happening. Be aware of what they're watching. Be aware of who they're interacting with. And if that means, you take their phone for 10 minutes to take a quick scroll, I think they're not going to like it. But I think that's also called being a good parent. We also know that some of these TV shows and movies can lead to negative emotions, leads to feeling of overwhelmingness. And there's also this idea where if it's acceptable, if committing suicide becomes acceptable, then they'll feel that it's okay for them to do it. So we have to be very, very careful of those specific influences that can occur within their lives. Okay, this is just a chart of what we're seeing, and I want to take a look at what we're seeing here of the ultimate spike. And this is one of those things that I was talking about, is that if you look at the spikes that have happened right around 2013, you can see it. It's dramatic, and it went quickly. Well, you can do the research yourself and start thinking about what are the types of things that happened around that time, right? What was going on, and what you'll see is that there's been a huge fluctuation of various platforms that allow for these social comparisons and various things like that. And as you start looking at it, as the kind of the thing went up with this huge spike, it's become incredibly clear that our children and adolescents are now experiencing and being influenced by things that we never had to deal with as young folks. And we can also see here that when you start making some of those social comparisons, when you're exposed to such things, that the outcome isn't always positive. Now, again, let me just talk about my own. This is Mike Vitaco's opinion here. I love social media. I think it really has the opportunity to bring people together. It can really provide for a lot of social benefits. But I do want to point out here that it's clear that there are some other concerns here of negative influences with people. So this is just making you aware of what that information, what it looks like, and the influence that it can have. All right. So let's talk a little bit about COVID, because it's 6 years ago now, and it seems like, well, that's forever ago, but our children are still dealing with some of the negative aspects of that. It brought people into houses. It made social interaction, and I talk about real social interaction, much less likely. There was just a greater isolation overall. And I'll tell you, as a clinical psychologist, in our sickest of the sick, our people with real long-term mental health disorders, we saw dramatic increases in symptoms. We saw increases in substance use. We saw increases in criminology, and all these things together really had a negative impact. There's a lot of things we don't know about what happened in that year plus. We know now that there's more now these longitudinal studies that are going to look at the data kind of in totality that are in the works. But I will share that this type of social isolation did our adolescents no good. It exposed them to things. It created a sense of loneliness, a sense of despair, a sense of problems that I think we're still experiencing now. And it's my firm hope and prayer that we never go back, even if we're confronted with such a thing again, because it had such a negative influence on our young people. But that is going to continue. But we do know that certainly as this greater technology occurred, for the record, I mean, we say, well, that's terrible. But before like 2020, I never did things like this online. It was all in person. So now we get the opportunity to do this online. It gets to be recorded. It gets to be available. I mean, that's a really, really positive thing. But with all those positives, there also were negative things that occurred. This also is a great time to mention that what adults can handle, what adults can deal with, kind of because we're more developed, our brains are developed, we're not having those significant changes in our body and our hormones. Adolescents may not be able to deal with as effectively. So when we say to things like, "Hey, I'm okay," it may mean that they are not. Okay. Talk a little bit about this, because this sometimes it gets misconstrued. Is that sometimes in adolescent boys especially, we'll see increased aggression. I want to point out this is more common in boys females tend to use more relational aggression, but there are possibilities that sometimes when we are seeing and observing aggression in boys, it's actually because they're depressed. It's important to talk to our young males about this. I'm not saying don't regulate their behavior. I'm not saying excuse it. I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying, though, is that it's imperative that we are aware of these issues and these things where adolescents, how they may manifest their mood issues. So if we see this in young males, we need to be aware of them. We need to have a talk with them, and if we can't do it, we need to find someone who can, because often we say things like this: "Oh, the boys are just being boys," and stuff. Well, certainly that may be correct, but significant aggression in boys too is not just like, oh, well, that's just normal. In many situations, it's actually not. So I want you to be aware of that sometimes mood disorders can be manifested as aggressive behaviors. And this is especially too in young men without a history of aggression. So, new things, all of a sudden this occurred out of nowhere. So again, it just may be, they have a surge of hormones going through them. Testosterone is now rearing its head. But also you should be aware that it may just not be that. And when we either excuse those things or we punish symptoms of a mood disorder, we're actually doing them a huge disservice. Okay. So this is the primary concern, right? Is recurring thoughts of death or suicide. And it's also, of course, any engagement in suicidal or kind of, I call it parasuicidal, which is like behavior that's concerning, but it doesn't rise to the level of suicidality, should be incredibly concerning. And let's also take this kind of with this idea in hand that adolescents by nature, right? And I can literally give you 100 studies that show this. And by the way, sometimes you don't need science to say what you know as a parent or as a caretaker. Adolescents are just more impulsive. They do more impulsive things. They do stupid things. I can speak to my own youth, and I did things when I was an adolescent that I now look back and say, oh my gosh, that was about as dumb as I could get. Was I dumb? No, but I did dumb things because I was impulsive. But know that when you combine depression and suicidal thoughts with impulsivity, what you're risking someone acting on that behavior. Makes it much more likely that they're going to act. Also, and this is kind of counterintuitive, but if you remember from the previous slides, I spoke about kind of like loss of energy, lethargy, sleeping issues. Many times in suicidal behavior or completed suicides, unfortunately, what we see on the outside is someone who's getting better. What they have is also they have the energy to engage in behaviors that were not going to be acted on otherwise. So those things, as they're feeling, as they're gaining more energy, all of a sudden they're interacting in what we think are better ways. And what's ultimately happened is, as the suicidal ideation has remained, those thoughts have remained, and all of a sudden now they are no longer lethargic. They have the energy. So now that they're able to actually complete their plan. I say this as an awareness, as just when you think, hey, I'm out of the woods. Don't think that yet. Be extra aware of, okay, are they still having those thoughts? Are they still, kind of where are they at with their mental health? So let's talk about this. A few things that I think are important is that I want to be aware of, kind of where these things is age of adoption, where the child was adopted from. If they're an older child, what was the condition of their home? Because obviously they're bringing all these things with them. So, so if they're going through significant change externally, like they're going to a new home, at the same time they're going through dramatic change internally, that is a risk factor. Certain countries and certain areas are at greater risk for depression and self-harm behavior. And children who grow up in homes that are of poor condition, parents who use substances, parents who may have been abusive. These are all risk factors for mood disorders and various things like that. So we need to be incredibly aware of what that child walks into as much as you can be. So being aware of those things allows us and provides us a better opportunity to be preemptive and get into and deal with these things before that they become issues. And listen, there's also the possibility that everything goes well and there's no problems. But be aware that these things do matter. Genetics matter. Mood disorders are transmittable through genetics, like everything else, like hair color and everything else. So again, this kind of brings me back to the stigma where we tell people, just get over it. Get up by your bootstraps. It's not a big deal. These things can be very problematic to say and actually don't really kind of address the major issue at hand. Talk a little bit about depression can be related to trauma. That is certainly obviously the case. I think we all know that. But some things we may not view as trauma can be very traumatic to kids and adolescents. Losing friends, being uprooted, having parents that are not present in our lives. And then of course, death, major life events. There's just a significant amount of research that talks about stress and mood disorders after major weather events. Like, we had a hurricane a couple years ago in Augusta, I guess maybe a little bit over a year ago. But these things can cause upheaval, not just to our homes, but to our lives, and can have major effects on our mood. And then something called reactive attachment disorder, which we may see in adoptive kids more so than children who are not, is that these individuals don't bond with their caretakers. And that lack of bonding and that lack of attachment can lead to a mood disorder, can lead to depression, and can lead to suicide. So talk a little bit about some of these reactive attachment disorders. I'm not going to get into this too much, but it leads to self-esteem issues. It leads to self-harm. It can even lead to lying. That they may lie to feel like they need to fit in. They may lie for all sorts of reasons. They may have more behavioral issues in school and at home. They don't interact socially as well, and they tend to have a flat affect, meaning like, the kids will be doing something fun, and you look over and you realize, man, they look absolutely like not that they're not having fun, just like they're not even experiencing anything. And these are things just to be aware of. And there's a lot of resources online, but if you're dealing with a child who's adopted, or you're kind of seeing some of these things, be aware that this might be from this reactive attachment disorder that, again, really has its roots in this lack of an appropriate social bond. Let me also say kind of this, is that sometimes this is also genetic, so it may not be anyone's fault. But with a lot of these things, I think sometimes when we talk about fault, we're barking up the wrong tree, if you will. Is that fault doesn't matter, is that we have an issue at hand that is in front of us that needs to be fixed, and then we have to go to work at trying to find the best way, the most appropriate way to kind of manage the issue. I want to talk about treatment. There really is a couple of things to be aware of here. First, adolescent depression is underdiagnosed and it's undertreated, and the numbers support that. The numbers support that this is an area of concern that just is not treated enough. There's also a lack of resources. There's not enough treatment providers. If you called right now in Augusta, I think you might find that you're going to be surprised at how long you're probably going to have to wait. Now, if you have a suicidal child and you have to go to the emergency room, obviously you're going to get care right away. But other than that, it's going to be a lot longer than you imagine. People talked about, what about telehealth? I think telehealth, where you deal with a licensed provider online, is a great alternative. And there are multiple telehealth agencies throughout the United States right now that are reputable, that deal with licensed people, that will work with your insurance, and all these very, very positive things. When I talk about all the negatives of COVID, this is one of the positives, is that COVID mandated that we find alternatives to traditional treatment modalities. And one of those alternatives has been the development of licensed providers online. The best treatment for depression is medication and talk therapy. And medication has gotten a bad rap. I've heard it sadly from pulpits. I've heard it sadly from Christians who I believe they're saying the right stuff. But these are not mind-altering drugs. These substances, these medications, normalize your neurotransmitters very similarly to how, and it's an old adage, how insulin modulates your blood sugar. You wouldn't say that you shouldn't take your insulin because this actually normalizes your blood sugar. Well, the same thing is about medications. They don't need to be forever. They don't need to be for years and years and years, but there may be a time when they're absolutely 100% appropriate in conjunction with therapy that provides you the best outcomes. And again, I want to take away some of that stigma, where people say, well, it's just a mind-altering substance. No, it's a mind-normalizing substance. It's normalizing your neurotransmitters, and it's allowing the individual to feel better about themselves and about their lives and to get back on the right path. And that's true both in adults and adolescents. All right. It's one of the last slides, but I wanted to say this is I think one of the most radical things you can walk away from here is that if you have a child or someone you're caring for and you're concerned about their suicidality or their depression, ask them, talk to them. Asking them does not create the environment where something bad is going to happen. Asking them creates the opportunity to hopefully have a real conversation about what is happening in their lives. And you may say something like this is, hey, I'm really worried about you. I'm concerned about you. And they may say something like, I don't want to talk about this. And that is when we'll say something like, that's too bad because I'm not going away until we do. This is too important. And if you don't want to talk to me, I see what's happening here. I see A, B, and C. Then I think you and I need to find someone that you are comfortable talking with, and I'm gonna facilitate and make that happen for you. But ask the hard questions. It's imperative that we do that. It's critical that we provide that opportunity for that communication, even if we're uncomfortable with it, or maybe even if we've been taught that hey, this is just moodiness and it's going to go away, because there are those times, and the statistics back me up, that it doesn't go away, and the outcomes are something that in the heat of a moment we lose someone we love, that could have been prevented. So it's now, typically there's more people here, but I know we got a couple of folks. If there's any questions, and I'll see what I can do about providing answers. If not, if I don't know the answer, I will see if I can get it and send it off and see if that would be of use. Ladies?
Thank you so much, Dr. Vitaco. So I actually had two questions. One of them you just answered, unless you wanted to elaborate on it. And my question was, when a caregiver starts noticing possible signs of depression in a child who may already struggle with trust or attachment, what are the first few steps so that you don't push that child further away? You did just touch on it as we were wrapping up. Yeah. If there's something you wanted to elaborate on.
Well, I'll elaborate this. I'm going to be blunt because I don't know a better way to be. I think it's okay being a pain in the ass, and I'm very sorry about that. But I think it's okay if you say with your child, I'm not leaving. I know you don't want to talk about this, and I understand that. But I'm worried about you, and I love you, and I care about you. And the worst thing that could happen here is you do something or something goes wrong. So we're going to say we're going to talk about this, and I'm willing to go find you someone to talk to. And I would even go as far as to say at that point to say, hey, I'm not going to be a part of this, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk with someone. And listen, that may be someone you know, that may be someone you drive to, and that's great. Or it may be someone that you find online, and I think that's fine too. The other thing, in most states in the United States, after a certain age, they're entitled to get mental health treatment with or without you. I'd want to do it with me. I'd want to be a part of that process, to be there for them, to let them know how much I support them, and to say, hey, we're gonna get through this together, and you don't have to do this alone. I am here for you as your parent, and I'm your biggest fan, and because of that, we're just not going to let this go. Don't allow. I'm a big believer in this too. I'm the parent. I'm in charge, and that doesn't mean I'm authoritarian, but it does mean that I'm going to make the decisions. And if we need to get assistance, we're going to get that assistance, and I'm going to make sure that happens. And you can hate me for it now, but you'll love me for it later.
That's not true. Thank you.
Do you have any advice for parents who are trying to find the right help for, do they go to a psychiatrist, a therapist? Like, what's some practical advice? Because they're overwhelmed. They're in the thick of like, what do I do? They're panicked.
Yeah. Well, my first suggestion is let's not be panicked, and let's do things in a very systemic way. So one of the great things about the internet right now is we can get online and we can look at reviews, or we can talk to other parents who we know have gone through this stuff. Hopefully folks have a good core group and say, hey, listen, I'm going through this. Did you ever experience this? Did you use anybody? What did you think of them? What were your thoughts? I'm going to say some things here that probably in many arenas aren't very popular, and if I offend someone, I'm very sorry. I do believe in therapy, and I do believe in treatment, but I would be very mindful of who I send my kid to, and because who has an influence on my kid, and the therapist does have an influence on my kid. I would talk to them about some of those questions, and I'm talking about issues of where do you stand on gender? Where do you stand on these important questions that our children are being influenced by these days? And I think by getting online and by looking at those things, and if you belong to a good church, I would talk to. There are Christian therapists out there who, and I think that's great. I want to make sure that they have training and education, because just like anyone else can say, hey, I'm a Christian therapist. Well, did you go to school? Do you have a master's degree? Are you licensed? Well, no, I don't need all that. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You got to have all that. But I would talk to people, and I would get recommendations. And I know that can be difficult, but sometimes that openness facilitates further discussion. But you also kind of like with anything else, if you're having a medical issue, hey, I need a good orthopedic. Who'd you go to? Right? We don't have problems talking about who's the best, who's the best person to operate on my knee. But we might have an issue talking about who's the best person to deal with my mental health. If we treat it like a medical issue, I'm hoping that we get rid of some of that stigma. But I would absolutely ask, who did you use? If we need a marital counselor, hey, has anyone here ever gone to? Oh my gosh, what's going on? Well, hey, we got to fix some things, and that's okay. That's okay.
That's great. I have one last question for you. And again, I think you did touch upon this a little bit. But in foster and adoptive children, especially those that come with just traumatic histories,
yeah,
caregivers begin to distinguish a little bit better between the depression and the trauma-related behaviors, since it seems like the things you mentioned, they really do look similar at times.
Well, they do, and by the way, they often go hand in hand. And I would say this, in many ways, it doesn't matter. And that sounds right. We're not minimizing the trauma, but either way, they may benefit from talking to someone or dealing with some of these things, from having real conversations. And one thing we could do is start with a therapist and let them sort of guide us through some of these things. Now, if you have an older adolescent, you may need your adolescent's permission to get that information, but I think that's okay. Typically, I think adolescents, if they feel you're on their side, if you're working with them, if you've established that good relationship, I would talk to the therapist like, hey, what are you seeing here? Are you seeing this as just trauma related? Or is this trauma related that's going into depression? Because they can be hand in hand. And certainly abuse and neglect and all these things that we know about, some of the things I talked about, can lead to serious and significant mood disorders. Trauma is one of the biggest public health, and I'm in the School of Public Health, is one of the biggest public health concerns today. Trauma is a issue, and in-home trauma can deconstruct those bonds and lead to just a ton of mental health problems, a ton, including mood disorders, including suicidal behaviors, including suicidal thoughts, including substance use, right? And all those things can go hand in hand, and many of them will have an interactive effect where I'm feeling depressed, I use substances. I feel more depressed, I use substances. I get impulsive, I use substances. I'm feeling suicidal, I use substances. I'm feeling more suicidal, I engage in inappropriate behavior. And it's a really vicious circle that continues to get worse over time. So I would, if someone has a significant trauma history, support them, work with them, and then see also what resources are available. Doesn't mean you always need therapy. I mean, in probably in more cases than not, you can deal with it. But if you feel like, hey, this is not typical, or I see some real problems here, I would rely on professional assistance, and I wouldn't hesitate.
Thank you.
I have just one more. I'm sure when we get off of here, I'm going to have like 10. But
You feel free to email me. I'll do my best at answering.
Thank you. With some of our families, what if you have the situation where the child refuses to go to therapy? They don't want to go.
Sure.
They refuse to participate.
Sure.
They're, and especially in older teens, there's, if that is one of the main things with therapy and medication and they're kind of stumped, any advice for those?
Yeah. Listen, let me acknowledge right from the jump. I have a niece who went through some pretty big trauma, and she was brought to a therapist, and she sat there for I think 3 sessions. I don't think she said a word, and I think she probably needed to. I think there was a lot going on. I don't want to get into specifics, but it was heavy stuff. I think ultimately we can't make them talk, but I think one of the things we can do that wasn't done in this situation was we can have big conversations with our kid. We can be open with our kid, or caretaker, somebody we're caring for, and talking about what we see and what we feel is essential, and really open up those lines of communication and say, listen, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I think it's imperative that you talk to someone. I really want you to give this a try. Or, is there another type of therapist you would like? I would give them at least some. They don't get to make the ultimate decision, but I think getting input is imperative. So, hey, okay, would you rather talk to a male or a female? Who are you most comfortable with? Is there a certain kind of therapist that you would like? Okay, sometimes I know, like, for example, when I was in college, I saw a therapist. I only wanted to see a male, and I did. And that was, by the way, he was terrific. He was funny and insightful, and he was funny. And I mean, I would go there, and I said that twice on purpose, because I felt like this guy got me. He wasn't just like he wasn't there to judge. But I got some say into, and it was my parents' insurance, by the way, but I got some say into who I was seeing. We should talk to her. Okay, so hey, John, I see this. We'd really like you to talk to someone. Who would you like to talk to, right? Who would you feel comfortable talking to? And open it that way, in kind of a non-judgmental, honest sort of fashion, and kind of get their input. Because when you give someone some control over it, I think you're much more likely to get someone who's going to be compliant with treatment.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mike.
Big stuff. You guys feel free to email me, and if I can be of more help, I'm always willing to do this. It's important conversations to have. It really is.
Thank you.
Great. We're so glad you came. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you're one of our Family Match families, please keep an eye on your emails for your village call information and any other helpful information that will be sent out. Dr. Fataco, again, thank you. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me, guys. You take care.